What if the knights in shining armor were as twisted as the dark alleys of a medieval town? What if the very code that exalted honor and loyalty also bred betrayal and bloodlust? Step closer, this isn't the fairy tale you learned in school. This is a world where Valor wears a mask, and the screams of the innocent echo louder than the clash of swords. Chivalry? It's a cloak draped over a viper's nest. Beneath the polished exterior lies a festering pit of greed, deceit, and lust for power. Picture a battlefield, banners waving triumphantly overhead. But wait! Look closer! That knight, all gallant and noble, just gutted his best friend for a piece of land. Why? Because glory is a currency, and betrayal is the interest rate. In a society that spins tales of gallant quests and fair maidens, darkness breeds in the shadows. Kings don't just rule, they play chess with lives. They smile while sharpening the blade for a backstab. Knights swear oaths of fidelity while their hearts beat with the rhythm of treachery. Every tournament is a masquerade, every joust a prelude to carnage. Chivalry is a game, and the stakes. Life or death. But let's not forget the women, the fair damsels caught in the crossfire of this brutal game. Treated like pawns, they wield power in ways unseen. A whisper here, a glance there, and kingdoms can crumble. Ever heard of the lady who turned a knight's heart into a weapon? She does it with a smile, while the men fight in her name, oblivious to the strings she pulls. It's a dark comedy, a tragic farce played out on a grand stage. And what of the peasants? They toil and bleed, the gears of this medieval machine. Their lives are fodder for the knight's glory, their dreams crushed under the weight of armored boots. Yet, every so often, a spark ignites. A revolt brews in the slums, and the oppressed rise. The knight's laughter echoes hollow in the face of rebellion. When swords clash, do they hear the whispers of the damned? Or is it merely the sound of their own doom approaching? Every tale of Valor hides a darker twist. The chivalric code is a double-edged sword, glinting with deception. Want to be a hero? Prepare to dance with devils. A simple quest for honor often leads to a vicious spiral of madness, where the line between right and wrong blurs, until morality becomes just another casualty on the floor of ambition. What happens when the darkness seeps into the hearts of the righteous? When the very foundations of chivalry fracture under the weight of ambition and betrayal? Hold your breath, you're about to plunge into the madness of medieval chivalry, where honor is a mask, and the truth is a tangled web of blood and betrayal. Ready to confront the abyss? You're already standing on the edge. The plunge into the dark side beckons, and there's no way back. A scream pierces the air, a visceral cry that shatters the fragile cloak of night. The moon hangs low, casting a pale, ghostly glow over a battlefield drenched in blood and sorrow. In this moment, the world shrinks to the chaos of clashing steel, the acrid stench of sweat and fear, and the chilling resonance of lives hanging in the balance. I can still hear it, that sound, a haunting melody of desperation, echoing in my mind, tugging at my soul. I remember William, his eyes wide with terror, as he lunged forward, sword raised, heart pounding like the thunder of war drums. He was no noble knight, but a farmer's son, thrust into a maelstrom that had little regard for his humble beginnings. I didn't ask for this, he screamed, his voice shattering against the clang of metal. The irony cut deeper than the blade he wielded, a boy with dreams of love now forced to confront the spectre of death. I could see the truth in his eyes, a flickering flame of hope dimming under the weight of bloodshed. And then there was Eleanor, her silhouette framed against the backdrop of flames licking at the night sky. She stood, fierce and unyielding, her spirit a wild stallion galloping through the wreckage of her world. She wasn't just a woman caught in the chaos, she was a warrior, a soul yearning for something more than the chains of expectation that bound her to the hearth. Her heart beat in rhythm with the clamor around her, and in that moment, she wielded the courage of 1,000 knights, defying the roles set before her. "This is not how our story ends," she cried, a battle cry woven with threads of desperation and defiance. The air crackled with tension, and I could feel time warping around me, past, present, and future colliding like the warriors in the fray. I remember the taste of ashes, the bitter tang of betrayal as William and Eleanor were swept into the tempest, each driven by their own demons, haunted by their own pasts. They fought not just against each other, but against the insatiable hunger of a world that demanded sacrifice. As swords clashed, their faces blurred in the din, but the emotions remained etched in my memory: the betrayal of kin, the weight of unspoken love, the echoes of old wounds. How easily love and war intertwine, twisting into a grotesque dance where every step forward is met with a step back, where passion ignites the flames of conflict. I remember the cool night air, heavy with the scent of impending rain, threading its way through the chaos, a reminder that even peace must wash over the desolation eventually. "Remember who you are," Eleanor shouted, her voice rising above the cacophony, a mantra thrust into the hearts of the fighting men. But even she could not drown out the whispers of their fears, the fear of failure, of loss, of being nothing more than shadows in a history written by others. The warrior code, once revered and noble, became tainted in the heat of battle, morphing into a bitter spectre that haunted their every move. In the shadow of a crumbling tower, William hesitated, his sword faltering as he faced a knight draped in the trappings of authority. The knight's eyes glinted with a cruel satisfaction, the embodiment of everything William despised, the embodiment of a world that had written his fate before he was even born. "You think you can usurp my throne?" the knight sneered, voice dripping with disdain. But William's heart was a tempest, his resolve firming like iron forged in the fire of his brother's betrayal, a bond severed by greed and ambition. "I do not seek your throne," he replied, every word a declaration of independence, a resistance against a fate dictated by bloodlines and privilege. "I seek my own." And in that instant, William became more than just a farmer's son, he became a symbol of the very ideals that chivalry was supposed to represent: honor, loyalty, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. But the night harbored its secrets, shadows waiting to swallow their dreams whole. As Eleanor's heart raced, she felt the weight of her desire, a longing that clashed violently with the expectations that suffocated her. How was she to be both a daughter and a warrior? To love and to fight? Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, each breath a plea for freedom. She yearned for the love that William ignited within her, but the battlefield demanded sacrifices that threatened to consume them both. The moon hung heavy overhead, a silent witness to their struggles, and I remember it, cold, indifferent, yet illuminating the path ahead. This war was only a chapter in their story, a crucible that would forge their identities. I could almost hear the ticking of an unseen clock, each second echoing the urgency of their choices. Time is an illusion, I thought, as the air crackled with potential, a storm brewing on the horizon. But what is chivalry when the world is drowning in chaos? Can honor survive when the blood of innocence stains the ground? I remember the uncertainty that hung thick like fog, a question that seemed to have no answer. As I watched William and Eleanor, their fates intertwined in ways they couldn't yet fathom, I felt the breath of history pressing in around us, an unseen force, guiding yet threatening to crush. And with every heartbeat, the tension swelled, a symphony of conflict that spiraled toward an inevitable crescendo. "Fight for what you believe in," Eleanor shouted, her voice a lighthouse in the storm. The weight of their choices loomed large, but in the chaos, they clutched at the remnants of their dreams, desperate to carve their names into a world that sought to erase them. The battlefield raged onward, the stark contrast of light and shadow weaving a tapestry of human experience, love, loss, ambition, betrayal. I remember each moment, each breath they took in that fleeting, fragile existence. And then, as if time itself paused, they faced each other, eyes locked in a moment that could either seal their fate or set them free. The clash of swords rang out, a bell tolling for the lost and the courageous, for the code that once defined honor and the ideals that were yet to be forged in the fires of experience. The night whispered promises and threats alike, each pulse of the universe echoing the haunting truth: chivalry was not just a relic of the past, it was alive, pulsating with the raw emotions of those who dared to embrace its legacy. In the chaos of steel and spirit, a new chapter awaited, one where the warrior code bent and twisted into something beautiful yet grotesque, a fragile dance between the light of courtly ideals and the shadows of a world steeped in blood. And with that, the story stretched onward, the battle raging in the heart of every soul who dared to fight for love, honor, and the haunting echoes of a chivalrous dream. The clash of steel rang out like the tolling of a bell, reverberating through the air thick with smoke and blood. Sir Alaric, his sword slick with the remnants of desperate men, stood frozen for a heartbeat, the world a blur of chaos and horror. Around him, the battlefield writhed, crimson banners snapped violently in the wind, and the anguished cries of the dying mingled with the guttural roars of men fueled by rage and fear. He had dreamt of glory, of honor, of battles fought for the crown and the lady he adored, yet here he was, lost in the mire of senseless violence, like so many bodies strewn across the ground, stained with the truth of war. I remember the smell, the rancid odor of sweat and rot, the way it clung to your skin, seeping into your very essence. I had thought knights were paragons, draped in shining armor, but shining armor had turned dull and rusty under the weight of reality. A knight was supposed to be a hero, a savior. Yet as Alaric felt the warmth of life drain from the man at his feet, the ideal crumbled. The truth was here, raw and relentless. A knight was also a butcher. Alaric! The voice sliced through his reverie. It was his brother-in-arms, Thomas, blood-slick and wild-eyed, as though he had wrestled with a demon. "We need to move. They're coming." But move where? To what end? They had set out to protect their lands, and now they were the destroyers of lives and dreams, their very existence a mockery of the noble cause that had united them. Alaric felt a tremor in his chest, a rift between who he had wanted to be and who he had become. "I can't," he murmured, his voice a whisper lost amongst the cacophony. "This isn't what we were promised." "Promises?" Thomas spat back, a fierce glint in his eye, the madness of survival igniting a fire of desperation within him. "Look around you. There are no promises in blood. Only survival." A shudder passed through Alaric's veins. He was torn between brotherhood and the haunting echoes of his own conscience. The clinking of armor felt like chains, dragging him into a pit of despair. He had imagined heroism forged in the fires of Valor, now it felt like a nightmare, a hellish realm where the noble knight was nothing more than a ghost haunting the memories of the lives he had extinguished. And then there was Eleonora, the lady whose laughter had once danced across the halls of his heart. He could almost hear her, a melody trapped in the shadows, calling him back to a world untouched by bloodshed. "You will be my knight," she had said, hope shining in her eyes. "You will bring peace." But peace had become a distant star, flickering and fading even as the battlefield raged on. He could see her face in the glimmer of the sun, bright and hopeful. But reality was now a tempest, swirling with the screams of the dying, the wails of mothers mourning their sons. This was the unbearable weight of his existence, each swing of the sword was an echo of her laughter turned to sobs. "How can I return to her?" he thought, dread sinking deeper than the mire beneath his feet. "Sir! They're flanking us." Thomas pulled him back to the present, eyes wide, panic straining his words. "We have to fight." The ground shook with the march of armored men, their faces obscured, a tide of faceless soldiers surging forward, driven by a singular purpose, to kill or be killed. The air crackled with the tension of the moment, and Alaric felt time stretch, dragging him into the abyss of indecision. The twinkling stars he had once aimed for now felt like cruel reminders of his own faltering humanity. "Do you remember the night before we left?" Thomas shouted, and Alaric's heart clenched. "We drank and laughed, full of dreams. Where are those dreams now?" His voice quaked, and Alaric could see the flicker of hope dwindling in his friend's eyes. "I remember," he breathed, bringing forth the ghosts of their past, candlelit evenings, laughter, promises of heroism wrapped in the warmth of camaraderie. But here, under the weight of the present, those memories felt like chains, binding him to a reality that threatened to shatter his very soul. With a sudden surge, the tide broke. The enemy descended like vultures over Carrion, fierce and unrelenting. Alaric gripped his sword tighter, heart hammering, blood roaring in his ears, a primal instinct urging him to fight, even as another part of him screamed to run, to escape the horror that enveloped him. "Stay by my side!" Thomas shouted again, the bond of brotherhood sounding like a lifeline in the storm of chaos. But Alaric knew that every bond forged in battle was tempered with the steel of sacrifice. He glanced at his friend, seeing the same flickering fear mirrored in his eyes. They were two souls, once bright with hope, now caught in a cruel game, pieces on a chessboard of death. And then Alaric saw it, the glint of steel aimed directly at Thomas's throat. Time slowed, the heartbeat of existence echoing in his ears. Without thinking, he lunged, desperation igniting his limbs. The world erupted in a symphony of screams as he collided with the enemy, the moment stretching out like a taut string ready to snap. In that split second, he felt the weight of everything, the love for Eleonora, the dreams of glory, the burden of a knight's promise. It was all crashing down, a cacophony of ideals clashing against the brutal reality of the battlefield. He was a hero, he was a butcher, he was a brother, he was a coward. And as steel met steel, as screams drowned out the last echoes of laughter, Alaric was left with nothing but the haunting question that echoed in the chambers of his heart. What was glory, if it came at the cost of humanity? What was the worth of a knight, when the knight himself had become lost in the shadows of war? Time twisted around him, every heartbeat an eternity, and as he fought, he realized that every fight was not just against the enemy but against the ghosts of his own ideals, swirling like shadows in the light of the dying sun. And the battle raged on, unrelenting, a tide of blood and anguish that would not cease, drawing him deeper into its suffocating embrace. Each clash of steel echoed with the weight of 1,000 dreams shattered, a relentless reminder that the line between the ideal and the real was as thin as the blade he wielded. The clang of swords echoed through the damp air, a brutal symphony of metal against metal. I could feel the vibrations pulsating through the ground beneath my feet, a heartbeat of chaos. In the midst of it all, Sir Edric stood tall, but I saw the tremor in his hand, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was a knight, yes, but behind the polished armor was a man caught in a tempest of survival and moral decay. Blood splattered the cobblestones, painting a grotesque picture, and I breathed in the metallic scent, sharp and sickening. I remember thinking how this was supposed to be a glorious battle, a testament to honor and valor. Yet here we were, lives extinguished in an instant, dreams turned to dust. The laughter of the townsfolk, once bright and jubilant, faded into ghostly whispers as they watched from the shadows. Then there was Lady Seraphine, her heart a wild storm. With a glance, she could wield a blade sharper than any sword. Her eyes were pools of anguish as she clasped a dagger, not meant for combat but for a darker purpose. I remember, she whispered to herself, the words trembling on her lips like a promise bound in blood. I remember the nights when chivalry was not just a facade. Her fingers brushed against the hilt, a reassurance and a curse. In her world, knights were not just warriors, they were protectors, lovers, and ultimately, destroyers. What was more dangerous? The blade that glinted in the sun or the heart that held it? Edric raised his sword high, a beacon of supposed righteousness, yet doubt festered in his gut like a festering wound. Every swing felt less like a dance of honor and more like a descent into madness. For glory, he cried, but the echo rang hollow in the air. These shouts were not for victory, they were for forgetting, for drowning the screams of their own conscience. I watched as he charged forward, a warrior driven by the weight of his armor and the burden of his choices. He sliced through flesh, not just of his enemies but of the very ideals he was sworn to uphold. I could see it in his eyes, the moment clarity shattered like glass. What was glory if it demanded this price? What was valor if honor lay buried beneath the corpses of the vanquished? Seraphine! Edric roared, but his voice cracked like glass. She turned, and for a moment, the battlefield vanished. They were just two souls caught in the wreckage of a world that demanded they sacrifice themselves on the altar of chivalry. You don't have to do this. But she was in too deep, a whirlpool of rage and regret. You don't understand, Edric. They will come for us, with or without our blades. The truth laced her words, and I could feel the tension thickening, wrapping around us like a noose. They were supposed to be allies, but the lines blurred in blood and betrayal. In the distance, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, a reminder that darkness was never far behind. I felt it creeping up my spine, a chill that whispered secrets of knights who had lost their way. What did it mean to be chivalrous when those ideals became shackles? Edric's heart raced as he saw Seraphine move, swift and deliberate. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for a future that had long since crumbled. I remember the warmth of laughter, she said, her voice a haunting melody. I remember, but the memories faded like smoke, leaving only the chill of the present. I could feel the weight of their choices pressing down, a palpable force threatening to suffocate any remnants of nobility. Edric swung his sword again, the arc a desperate plea for redemption. Each clash of steel felt like a countdown, a ticking clock that echoed the fleeting nature of life and honor. A moment of stillness pierced the chaos. In that silence, I saw the ghosts of their souls, the knight who fought for glory, the lady who wielded her heart as a weapon. We were meant to be more than this, Edric whispered, the admission raw and vulnerable. But the world did not listen. The wind howled, carrying away their hopes like forgotten dreams. Shadows danced around them, taunting with the sweet promise of glory that had turned bitter. Chivalry morphed into a grotesque mask, hiding the truth beneath layers of blood and violence. Seraphine lunged, her dagger gleaming in the dying light, a comet hurtling through the darkness. If you will not choose, I will. The ferocity of her spirit ignited something deep within Edric. He moved not out of allegiance but out of desperation, grappling with the grim reality that the ideals he held dear had become chains. I felt the tension winding tighter, the air thick with unspoken words, regrets clawing at their insides. What have we become? He gasped, and the question hung like a ghost, haunting the corners of their hearts. As blades collided, the world outside faded, leaving behind a tapestry of emotions, fear, love, betrayal, and the crushing weight of choices unmade. The echoes of their struggle reverberated through the night, a cacophony of broken promises. I could see the urgency in their movements, hear the desperation in their breath, feel the weight of the narrative pressing down, spiraling towards an inevitable end, or perhaps, a new beginning. I remember, Seraphine's voice trembled, a spark of vulnerability piercing through the chaos. I remember a promise made before blood stained our hands. And in that moment, I knew they were bound not just by the horrors they faced but by the deeper scars etched into their souls. Their fight was not only against the enemy before them but against the darkness that loomed within. Each clash of steel was a step deeper into the abyss, and each heartbeat echoed the truth: they were warriors trapped in a storm they could neither control nor escape. The night stretched on, alive with the cries of the fallen and the promise of bloodshed yet to come. Chivalry had become a curse, a bittersweet melody that played on repeat, drowning out the whispers of their humanity. Fear wrestled with hope, a twisted dance that echoed through the ether. Time stood still, a haunting reminder that in this world, the line between knight and monster blurred in the shadows. A sliver of moonlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaos, a fleeting reminder that even in the depths of despair, light could pierce through. But that light was fragile, a whisper against the tempest that was about to unfold. Fear clung to the air, heavy as the armor they wore, and I could feel it chill my bones. And so it continued, a cycle of violence wrapped in the guise of honor, a dark tale of chivalry that begged to be rewritten. But who could rewrite the story when the ink was blood, and the pages were stained with the memories of a past they could never escape? Thunder rumbled like a distant war drum, the storm outside a mere whisper compared to the tempest brewing in the hearts of three souls gathered in the flickering shadows of a crumbling keep. Rain lashed against stone walls, a relentless drum roll echoing the anxiety that churned in the pit of their stomachs. The flicker of candles painted grotesque shadows, like ghosts dancing to a dirge, a dance of fear, regret, and duty. I swear I could smell the salt of my own sweat mingling with the damp earth, the air thick with the weight of unfulfilled promises and unspoken fears. There stood Sir Alaric, his armor tarnished, bearing the scars of countless battles. His hands trembled, not from the chill of the storm, but from the burden he carried, an obligation to his lord, to his family, to the very ideals he once cherished. All around him, echoes of a past life clung to the air, memories of glory now twisted into chains of expectation. His heart thudded, a caged beast desperate for freedom. He thought of the boy whose life he had taken last summer, the boy who had just wanted to be a soldier like him. Guilt gnawed at his insides, each heartbeat a reminder of that fateful day. I remember, he whispered, almost to himself, I remember the sun on his face, the laughter before the clash. The laughter had died, leaving only the echo of steel meeting flesh. Across the chamber, Lady Isolde watched him, her heart a battlefield. She was both drawn to him and repulsed by what he represented. Alaric was duty and honor, a knight marred by the world's brutality, yet she saw the flicker of a man behind the armor, a flicker that reminded her of the dreams she once had, dreams of love, of freedom, of a life beyond the castle walls. The storm outside roared to life, mirroring her inner tempest. You think you're the only one burdened with choices, Alaric? Her voice cut through the storm, sharp as a blade.
You think I don't feel the weight of my father's ambitions?
I'm just a pawn in this game of lords and ladies, but you, she gestured wildly, rage bubbling to the surface, you wield a sword forged from the lives of innocent men. But Alaric, lost in his own sorrow, couldn't hear her. The echoes of his past rang louder than her accusations. He recalled the faces of comrades lost, the shouts of dying men. A knight's path was paved with blood, yet the blood never truly washed away. I remember, he murmured again, barely louder than a sigh, I remember the taste of victory turning bitter. Every battle fought had drawn him one step further away from himself, his soul a ghost haunting the very halls he defended. Then there was Roderick, a squire with dreams larger than his humble station. He stood in the shadows, silent as the grave, a witness to this storm of emotion. His heart raced as he absorbed their clash, feeling as if he were perched on the edge of a cliff, the abyss below yawning wide. He wanted to scream, to tell them both how he idolized their strength, the way they faced the world with armor that shone like the sun. But now, he saw the fractures. The cracks in their armor were deep, and he feared their bravado was a facade hiding something darker. I remember, he whispers, afraid that if he speaks too loudly, he'll shatter the moment. I remember wanting to be like you, Alaric. But now, I see the truth. The truth hung in the air, tangible and suffocating, and it was heavy with the weight of feudalism, the brutal power dynamics that turned men into monsters and dreams into ashes. The knight served a lord who served his own greed, the lady bound by the chains of her lineage, and the squire caught in the crossfire of their disillusionment. It was a cycle, a wheel that ground hope into dust. Rain poured harder, the wind howling like a banshee, drowning their voices in a cacophony of chaos. Alaric, his heart pounding like war drums, turned to Isolde. What do you want from me, Isolde? I can't change who I am, who I've become. The desperation in his voice hung like a noose, tightening around their throats. Isolde stepped closer, her anger flickering, morphing into something deeper, fear, empathy, a yearning for understanding. I want you to see, Alaric. This life is a lie. You're fighting for a lord who feeds on the suffering of others. Look at us. She gestured wildly, a storm of emotion. We are not just pieces on a chessboard. We have dreams, we have hearts that bleed. Roderick's fists clenched, each word resonating within him. He stepped forward, his voice trembling but resolute. I refuse to be a pawn. His shout sliced through the storm, shocking the air into silence. I want to be a man, not a weapon. I want my own dreams. Their eyes met, a triangle of raw emotion, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something unnameable, a bond forged in shared agony, in the recognition of their burdens. The storm raged on, but within this room, a different kind of tempest was brewing. It was a reckoning, a confrontation not just with one another, but with the very foundations of their lives. As the thunder rolled, the shadows danced more frantically, whispering secrets of power and betrayal. The walls of the keep felt alive, breathing in the turmoil, holding on to the weight of their decisions. In that moment, everything shifted, the knight, the lady, the squire, they were bound together by the invisible chains of their existence, their choices intertwining like roots of an ancient tree, deep and twisted. I remember the moment before the storm, the moment before everything would change again in a world where the knight's burden was heavier than any sword he could wield. But the real battle was not one of steel, it was within, a fight for their souls, for their very essence, against the darkness that threatened to consume them all. The rain continued to lash at the stones, but in the heart of this crumbling castle, a fire ignited, lighting the way through the shadows of their intertwined fates. The moon hung low that night, a sickle of silver slicing through the dark, its sharp edge mirrored by the glint of steel. The air crackled with tension as if the cosmos itself held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of hooves thudding against the earth echoed like a heartbeat, a pulse racing toward an inevitable confrontation. I remember the chill in my bones as I stood on the edge of the clearing, the smell of damp earth and freshly turned soil mingling with the sweat of my fear. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound, leaving only the whisper of fate to guide us. The duel was imminent, two souls on the brink of destruction, their honor clashing like swords. Sir Alaric stood tall, his broad shoulders cloaked in shadows, a man forged in the fires of valor and stained by the ashes of regret. His heart raced not just with the thrill of battle, but with the weight of a choice that felt like an iron shackle. I could see it in his eyes, a fierce storm brewing beneath the surface, a tempest of loyalty and betrayal that threatened to break free. His opponent, Lord Cedric, was a ghost in the night, a spectre of arrogance and ambition. A thin smirk danced on his lips as he taunted Alaric, the words slicing through the tension like a knife. "You think honor is a shield? It is but a shackle, Alaric, and you are chained to it." Every heartbeat echoed my own doubts. Honor. What a fickle mistress she was, draped in the finest silks of virtue yet stained by blood. I, who loved them both, stood paralyzed by the enormity of it all. To honor one meant addition and the other. It felt like a game of chess, each move leading to destruction, and I was the pawn caught in the crossfire. I watched as Alaric's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the hilt of his sword. "You will pay for your words, Cedric." The promise hung heavy in the air, thick with the scent of iron and inevitability. The stars twinkled above, oblivious to the human folly below, a cruel reminder that time was an unyielding judge, and all awaited its verdict. I remember the flicker of doubt, creeping like a shadow between us. Was this honor worth the price? In that moment, a flash of memory flooded my mind, a sunlit field where laughter danced on the breeze, where friendship bloomed like wildflowers. But now, the laughter had turned to echoes, the wildflowers wilted under the weight of pride. The world narrowed to a heartbeat, the sound of the clock ticking away the moments until it struck midnight, and with it, the finality of choice. The duel would not only carve their fates but etch itself into the marrow of my soul. "Have you ever wondered, Alaric," Cedric continued, his voice low and taunting, "if your honor will save you when the sword pierces your flesh? When your heart spills onto the ground? Will it whisper sweet nothings to your dying breath?" The moonlight caught the edge of Alaric's sword, illuminating the dread in his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he once was, a boy with dreams as vast as the night sky, now reduced to a man burdened by the weight of duty. He took a breath, deep and ragged, a futile attempt to gather courage, yet every inhale was laced with the taste of desperation, a longing to escape this twisted fate. "Honor is a sword," Alaric breathed, each word sharp, "and I will wield it." But honor had a way of twisting the blade, and I could see it in his body, the way he stood rigid, as if the very act of drawing that sword would sever the bond that tied us. The air thickened, charged with unsaid words, and my heart ached for the boy who chose the path of nights and shadows. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the world in shades of crimson, the duel began. Swords clashed with a ferocity that rattled the trees, each strike a testament to the bond between them, a bond turned weaponized by pride. I felt each blow in my chest, a visceral reminder of what was at stake, not just their lives, but every memory we had forged together, every laugh that now echoed like a ghost in the hollow chambers of my heart. "Remember the tales we spun?" I whispered to the night, hoping the shadows would carry my words to them. "Remember when we dreamed of glory, of honor untainted? This is not it." But the cosmos offered no solace, only the mindless ticking of time, each second reinforcing the dread that hung over us. They danced the dance of death, their fates entwined in a tapestry woven with threads of regret and ambition. The ground trembled under their feet, and I could feel the weight of history pressing down. The trees, ancient witnesses to this drama, swayed in a silent plea for peace, their leaves rustling like whispers in the wind. But honor had a way of deafening the heart, blinding reason, and I could see the final act unfolding, the inevitable climax that would leave scars deeper than the swords could inflict. A final strike brought Alaric to his knees, the gleam of betrayal and sorrow flashing in his eyes, mirroring the agony of lose. Cedric stood over him, breathless, triumph mingling with the ghost of guilt in the shadows of his heart. The weight of their choices hung in the air, a silent scream for redemption. In that moment, time held still, the universe paused, allowing the heavy silence to settle, a pregnant pause before the storm. And as dawn broke, painting the world anew, I realized that honor, in all its glory, was a merciless god, demanding sacrifice, leaving nothing but ghosts in its wake. I stood there, my heart shattered, each piece echoing through the void, a heart-wrenching melody of love and loss intertwining in a chaotic dance. The duel was over, but the echoes of their choices would linger in the air, like the scent of rain on parched earth, forever haunting the memories of what could have been. The consequences of honor, a cruel mistress, would ripple through time, binding us all in a tapestry woven with pain, hope, and the relentless pursuit of redemption. It was midnight, darkness draped the world like a heavy cloak, thick with secrets and unshed tears. The moon hung high, a witness to the silent agony that seeped through the stone walls of the castle, where shadows danced like restless spirits on the cold, unforgiving floor. In the flickering candlelight, I stood there, heart racing, breath shallow, tethered to a moment that felt like a noose tightening around my throat. In that stillness, a scream echoed in my mind, buried deep beneath the layers of expectation, obligation, and the suffocating weight of being a woman in a world crafted by chivalry, a world where honor often thrived on the objectification of our very souls. I remember the first time I felt it, the way they looked at me, knights with shining armor, their gazes appraising, dissecting, like wolves sizing up prey. I was not a person, I was a prize, an emblem of virtue to be won in a tournament, the delicate flower in the midst of a battlefield. I could see it in their eyes. And yet, here I was, Eleanor, trapped between despair and defiance, a single flame flickering in a gale. My heart pounded in time with the distant clash of swords, a haunting reminder that valor and virtue often masqueraded as chains wrapped around our necks. Across the hall, I caught a glimpse of Margaret, my sister, a fierce spirit caught in a fragile body, her eyes twin flames of rebellion flickering against the oppressive shadows. She had always been louder than I, bolder, her laughter like a silver bell shattering the heavy air. But tonight, her laughter was swallowed by an uneasy silence, replaced by a simmering rage. Margaret had watched our father's face twist with pride as he boasted about our forthcoming betrothal, her heart shattering with each hollow word. A match made in heaven, he had said, blissfully unaware of the hell that awaited us. I could see it churning in her gut, that insatiable need for autonomy, for agency, battling the chains of expectation. In her mind, I could almost hear the whispered cries of our ancestors, women who had fought like warriors with no swords, their voices a symphony of resilience that echoed in the caverns of our souls. I would rather be a ghost than a puppet, she had said once, her voice a firebrand, and I believed her. But the truth is, being a ghost was a far too familiar fate for our kind. We walked the earth, but we were not seen, we were merely shadows cast by the flickering light of male ambition. As the night deepened, I felt the weight of countless expectations seep into my bones, an anchor pulling me into a churning sea of despair. I remember the way the castle seemed to breathe around me, its stone heart thumping in rhythm with all our unfulfilled dreams. Every corner whispered secrets, every creak in the floorboards echoed the laughter of lost hopes. I was trapped, caught in a tapestry woven from the threads of honor, love, and control, each thread a reminder of my place in this wretched order of chivalry. But then there was William, the knight with the haunted gaze who lingered in the shadows, a puzzle wrapped in armor, his presence stirring something deep within. He was not like the others, he saw beyond the surface of our existence, a mirror reflecting our struggles. What if, he once asked, his voice low and rough like gravel, what if we could rewrite the code? What if honor wasn't a cage but a shield? Each word fell like thunderclaps in the stillness, igniting a spark deep within me, and I wondered, could we find the strength to break free? Our interactions were fraught with tension, laden with an intensity that made my heart race and my breath hitch. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on us, yet in that shared longing, I found a flicker of hope. Margaret saw it too, her fierce spirit igniting at the very thought of rebellion. We are more than the sum of our titles, she would scream into the night, her voice a clarion call, and in her fervor, I found my own voice awakening, trembling yet resolute. But the castle was a hawk circling its prey, and the winds of fate were unkind. A single betrayal could shatter our fragile alliance, could turn whispers of defiance into echoes of despair. I felt it in the air, thick and heavy, a storm brewing in the hearts of those who watched us. The knights, once allies, now glared with envy and disdain, their armor gleaming like serpents in the night, ready to strike when our guard was down. The tension coiled tighter, each moment an unspoken promise of chaos. I could feel the weight of the world pressing against my chest, every heartbeat a countdown to a confrontation that would either break us or set us free. I watched as Margaret's resolve hardened, her spirit a tempest ready to unleash its fury upon the suffocating silence. "We will not be mere pawns in this game," she hissed, her voice a razor's edge, and I felt the cosmos tilt, the stars aligning behind her audacity. Yet here we stood, two women cloaked in fear yet adorned with the courage of generations past, teetering on the precipice of our destiny. In the hours of darkness, we found our voices, a haunting melody woven through the fabric of time. The shadows whispered of battles yet to come, of scars that would etch themselves into our souls long after the swords had been sheathed. Each breath we took was a challenge, a defiance, a promise that we would carve our names into the annals of history, not as objects to be won but as warriors fighting for our agency. The world would hear us, whether they wished it or not, and in that echo, we would find our truth, fragile yet unyielding, a testament to the fire that burned within us. And so, as the clock struck, the wheels of fate began to turn, setting us on a path where agency and objectification would clash in a storm of raw emotion. The night was just beginning, and we were but shadows in the moonlight, ready to find our place in a world that had tried so hard to silence us. We were women, and we would rise. Blood-soaked banners flutter in the wind, the cries of the dying pierce the air, and the stench of burnt flesh sinks into the soil like an unshakable curse. I stand amidst the chaos, a solitary figure on this desolate battlefield, and I cannot help but feel the electric pull of something darker, a shadow lurking beneath the surface. The clang of metal rings in my ears, but it's the silence that follows that chills me to the bone. The silence after the storm. It's the quiet of a moment before the inevitable, a moment where time itself seems to hold its breath. I remember the faces, twisted and distorted by fear and fanaticism. Richard, a knight clad in rusting armor, once so proud, now just a fragment of the man he thought he was. His eyes are wild, bloodshot, haunted by the horrors he has inflicted and the horrors yet to come. He grips his sword as if it's a lifeline, but the truth is, he's drowning in it. "For God," he screams, but I hear the tremor in his voice, the doubt that flutters like a caged bird in his heart. His faith has become a weapon, and he wields it mercilessly, forgetting that faith was once a shield. Then there's Miriam, a woman caught in this tempest of malevolence and righteousness. She stands on the periphery, her long hair blowing like a banner of defiance against the backdrop of war. She wasn't supposed to be here, her place was in the home, tending to the hearth, nurturing life. But the flames of fanaticism have drawn her in, igniting a fire that burns bright and insatiable. I catch a glimpse of her face, streaked with dirt and tears, and it's heart-wrenching. "I do this for my family," she whispers, but I see the glint of vengeance in her eyes. It's a twisted justification, a desperate grasp at something, anything, that resembles power in a world gone mad. I remember the night before the battle. We gathered around a flickering fire, the shadows dancing like specters, and the air thick with a mixture of fear and fervor. Richard recited prayers, his voice rising like a battle cry, drowning out the gnawing doubts that clung to our souls. "This is our destiny," he shouted, and we echoed his words, the mantra of zealots taking root in our hearts. But even then, the flicker of doubt in Miriam's eyes mirrored my own. We were caught in a web of conviction and contradiction, the very fabric of our lives woven from threads of faith and fear. In the distance, a horn blares, a sound that rattles through our bones, summoning us to face the madness we've unleashed. I feel a shudder run through me, a primal instinct clawing at my insides. The battlefield looms like a gaping maw, ready to devour us whole. The earth is soaked with the blood of innocent souls, trampled by the feet of those who believed they were serving a greater purpose. But what purpose justifies the carnage? What god demands such a price? As we surge forward, the clamor of battle envelops us. I feel the heat of the flames, taste the ash on my tongue. The cries of the wounded mingle with the prayers of the faithful, a cacophony of desperation and delusion. For the Holy Land, we scream, as if our voices could drown out the screams of our conscience. Yet, in the heart of the storm, I catch sight of a boy, no older than 10, trembling by a shattered wall, clutching a tattered doll. His eyes, wide and glassy, reflect the horror of a world unraveling. "Why?" he whispers, a question so heavy it could crush us all. Why indeed? The moment hangs, suspended in time. I want to reach for him, to pull him away from the abyss of violence, but I am paralyzed. A war cry shakes me from my reverie, and I am thrust back into the chaos. Richard is charging forward, a whirlwind of rage and zeal, slashing, shouting, convinced that each blow is a step toward salvation. I watch as he becomes something monstrous, a mere shadow of the man who once believed in honor. Miriam is not far behind, her blade drawn, eyes filled with a fierce determination. I will protect what is mine, she howls, but I see the cracks in her resolve, the flicker of a heart torn between vengeance and compassion. She lunges forward, and in that instant, I glimpse her soul, torn and tattered, a reflection of a world that has lost its way. We are all just pieces of a puzzle, scattered across a battlefield, desperate to make sense of the chaos. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that dance like phantoms, and as the clash of steel rings out, it becomes a symphony of violence. Each swing of the sword, each life extinguished, echoes with the weight of every forgotten prayer. For God, they chant, yet I see the truth lurking behind the zeal, a desperate plea for meaning in the face of senseless slaughter. The blooded ground becomes a canvas painted with our sins, and we are all but players in a cruel theater of war. I remember the taste of betrayal, bitter and sharp. I remember the way hope flickered and dimmed like a dying ember. The shadows lengthen, stretching across the remnants of our humanity, and as night descends upon us, it carries the ghosts of those we've lost, the echoes of their cries reverberating through time. In the end, what remains? A handful of dust, a scar on the earth, and the weight of our choices. As I stand here, teetering on the precipice of despair and resolve, I know that this is not just a battle for land, it's a war for our very souls. And as I look into the eyes of my companions, I see not just warriors, but haunted souls seeking redemption in the ashes of atrocity. The moon hung high, a pale eye watching the chaos below. I stood in the shadows, heart racing, each thud a metronome against the backdrop of flickering flames. Voices clashed like swords, rage and despair swirling together in a grotesque dance of betrayal. I could smell the smoke of a bitter, acrid scent that curled into my lungs, choking me. The night was alive, electric with unspeakable tension. Chivalric orders, brotherhoods and their hidden agendas had come to life, but those twisted allegiances felt more like a noose than a bond. I remember the day I first donned my armor, how it gleamed under the sun, a reflection of honor and valor. But now, it felt like a tomb, heavy and suffocating. I had sworn an oath, a promise stitched into the fabric of my very being, yet here I was, on the precipice of a war that had long lost its noble spirit. Sir Cedric's face flashed in my mind, his broad shoulders, his laughter echoing through the halls of our sanctuary. But laughter had turned to screams, and friendship twisted into a sharpened dagger aimed straight at the heart. Ronan! The voice pierced through the chaos, brittle and soaked in fear. Seraphine stood there, eyes wide, her hands trembling as she clutched a blooded banner, the symbol of our brotherhood now marred by treachery. Her fire-red hair was wild, a storm of emotions cascading down her shoulders. They're coming for us. We need to leave. But where would we go? The city around us was a labyrinth of shadows and ghosts, where every alley whispered secrets and every corner held the specter of betrayal. I could feel the weight of her desperation, and it fueled the turmoil within me. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the brutal reality we faced, yet I was ensnared in a quagmire of my own making. We can't run, I gritted my teeth, the words slicing through the air like a blade. Not when they've already stained our honor. I could see the glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes, a frail candle against the storm that raged outside. I wanted to snuff out the darkness, but every flicker of defiance felt like a betrayal of the brotherhood I had sworn my life to protect. Ronan, think of Cedric. He still believes in the Order. Her voice cracked, emotion spilling forth like blood from an open wound. I remembered Cedric, the fierce loyalty in his eyes, his unwavering belief that chivalry could carve a path through the night. But that night had turned into a nightmare, and my heart ached with the weight of his absence. He wouldn't want us to give up. But what if Cedric had been swallowed whole by the very ideals we fought for? What if he had succumbed to the darkness that lurked behind our noble facade? The thought sent a chill through my veins, the image of my brother in arms morphing into something sinister. In my gut, I felt the gnawing dread, a truth that hovered just out of reach, lurking in the shadows. I had always believed in the legends, in the righteousness of our cause. Yet here I was, standing on the threshold of betrayal, poised to make a choice that could sever the bonds of brotherhood forever. What if we run and leave him behind? I whispered, the question festering like an open wound. What if he's one of them? Her eyes, once ablaze with determination, dimmed, and for a moment, I saw the reflection of my own fear mirrored back at me. It was a fragile moment, a threadbare connection woven from shared histories and whispered dreams. The pull of our past clashed violently with the tempest brewing in our hearts. And then, like a ghost rising from the depths of a forgotten grave, Cedric appeared, framed by flickering flames, a spectre of hope or horror. His face was lined with determination, eyes alight with an intensity that threatened to consume him. "Ronan," he shouted over the cacophony, his voice a clarion call. "You've got to trust me." Trust. A word heavy with the weight of history. I had trusted him once, and it had cost us both. Yet here he was, a flickering fire in the darkness, igniting something within me, a desperate need to believe again. But behind him, shadows shifted, dark figures merging into a single entity of malevolence. I could feel them closing in, an invisible noose tightening around my throat. "Ronan, Seraphine." Cedric reached out, his hand trembling. "We can't let them win. We're brothers." "But which brother?" The air crackled with tension, and I could almost hear the heartbeat of the night, quickening in dread. The brotherhood I had once revered felt like a twisted pantomime, the ideals corrupted by ambition and greed. There was something lurking beneath, hidden agendas, whispered promises of power that seduced even the purest of hearts. "Choose," I whispered, the inevitability of the moment crashing down like a tidal wave. "Choose who you'll stand with." A flicker of fear danced in Seraphine's eyes as she glanced between us. I felt the fracture beneath our foundation, a rift widening into an abyss of uncertainty. And then, with a resolve that defied the chaos, she stepped forward, a voice trembling yet fierce. "I choose to stand with truth. No more shadows, no more lies." Her words hung in the air, a beacon amid encroaching darkness. But truth could be as savage as any sword, and I could feel the weight of her choice pressing down on me. Time stretched, every heartbeat echoing through the silence that followed. Choices carved into flesh, friendships shattered like glass. Outside, the storm raged on, voices raised in fury, the clang of steel, the cries of the wounded. I stood at the precipice of destiny, watching as the world around me twisted and turned, caught in a vortex of despair. "Ronan!" Cedric's voice sliced through the haze, raw and desperate. "If we fall together. Together, or apart." The dichotomy seared into my soul, a choice that would haunt me long after the echoes of battle faded. The flames danced, licking at the edges of our resolve, shadows stretching into the void. The only truth I had left was the pulse of my heart, racing toward a confrontation I couldn't escape. In that moment, I understood, the chivalric orders, the brotherhoods, the hidden agendas, they were no longer just stories of honor. They had become a living nightmare, entwining fate and folly in a deadly embrace. The city was ours, but at what cost? And as the shadows closed in, I realized I would have to confront not just the ghosts of my past, but the very essence of what it meant to be a brother. Would I fight for the ideals that had once lit the fire in my heart, or would I forge a new path through the darkness, a path that might lead us toward salvation, or ruin? But that choice? It lingered in the air, a whispered promise of what lay ahead. The night was far from over, and so were the battles yet to be fought. A lance splintered, wood shattering like fragile dreams under the weight of destiny. The crowd inhaled, a collective gasp rising like smoke, thick and palpable. There, in the center of the dirt-strewn field, two knights collided, their armor catching the sun in a violent dance of light and shadow. The echo of hooves against hardened earth reverberated through my bones, a staccato heartbeat that quickened the pulse of the world around us. I remember the smell of sweat and fear, of leather and iron, mingling with the fragrance of roasted meat from nearby vendors, a grotesque feast for an audience craving spectacle over sanity. Sir Cedric, a towering figure with the strength of mountains, soared toward his rival, Sir Alaric, a man whose nimbleness belied the weight of his plate armor. I could see the tension in their eyes, a storm brewing behind steel visors. Alaric's heart raced, fueled by the memory of his father's last, defeated joust, the echo of his name barely a whisper in the annals of history. I remember how Alaric's hands trembled as he gripped the lance, the wood splintering beneath his fingers like the fragile threads of his honor. And then, in that breathless moment, they clashed, clattering steel against steel, a symphony of violence that sent shivers down my spine. I felt the impact resonate through me, a pulse of brutality that drew the breath from my lungs. The world narrowed to this singular clash, nothing else existed beyond the din of the crowd, the cheers and curses woven together like a tapestry of raw emotion. Glory was a fickle mistress, as seductive as she was cruel. I remember all too well that day, my own heart ached as I stood apart, a mere observer, yearning for the adrenaline that coursed through their veins. Never had I been a knight, nor did I ever wish to be. The thought of being thrust into the arena, facing the very real possibility of death, was chilling. Yet the thrill of it all, the madness, I craved. I remember how I occupied that space, caught between envy and admiration, a dark humor creeping in. They bathed once a year, I thought, chuckling at the absurdity, so yeah, romance was earthy. In the crowd, Lady Elara watched, her heart caught in a vice of anticipation and dread. She wore a gown of deep emerald, its richness reflecting her own aspirations, jewels of hope tucked away like secrets in the folds of silk. She loved Alaric, and her eyes glimmered with fierce loyalty, even as they clouded with the shadows of doubt. I remember her breath hitching, a fragile gasp as each clash reverberated through the air. Would he survive? Would he become a hero, or vanish like so many before him, lost to the grit of the arena? He has to win, she whispered to herself, he just has to. The joust was no mere game, it was a relentless battle against fate, a dance with death in front of thousands. The stakes were higher than glory, now, they were entangled with love, a desperate echo of promises made and dreams yet unfulfilled. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in Alaric's eyes, the haunting spectre of potential loss flashing before him. Was it worth it? Would a crown of laurel leaves taste sweet when drenched in the blood of the fallen? The trumpets blared, the signal piercing through the tension like a dagger. The next round began, and the earth trembled beneath their steeds. Adrenaline surged, the crowd thrumming like a living entity, a beast hungry for carnage. With every charge, I felt the walls of reason cracking, the horror and beauty of it all swirling into an intoxicating blend. I stood witness to the folly of man, the fragility of honor. Cedric, fierce as a bull, lowered his lance with calculated precision, a predator stalking his prey. Alaric felt the wind tear past him as he braced for impact, remembering not just his father's failure but the weight of Elara's expectations. "This is for you," he whispered, and it turned into a prayer, lost in the din of battle. The moment they collided again, the world erupted, the sound was visceral, primal, a cacophony of flesh meeting steel. Time slowed, and I saw it in slow motion, Cedric's lance snapping, splinters flying like scattered hopes. Alaric staggered back, his horse rearing, and I could read the panic in his eyes. This cannot be the end, I thought, my own heart racing with each breath. Elara's scream cut through the chaos, tearing at the fabric of the arena. No! The word echoed like a bell tolling, reverberating with so much pain. She surged forward, lost in the tide of humanity, desperate to reach him, to pull him from the brink of oblivion. I remember the raw emotion, the way she clawed her way through the throng, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, each beat a plea for survival. And then it happened, a final clash, the sound reverberating in the very marrow of my bones. Sir Cedric fell, the ground swallowing him whole, a silence settling like a shroud over the field. Alaric, breathless, staggered, and every eye clung to him, the weight of history resting on his shoulders. In that moment, he was more than a knight, he was a vessel of every unfulfilled dream, every unspoken word. Time stretched, a taut cord, ready to snap. I felt the emotions collide around me, heavy and electric, joy twisted with despair, the thrill of victory laced with the bitterness of loss. Elara reached him, trembling fingers brushing against his cheek, and the world around us faded into an echo of possibilities, of what could have been. With the dust settling and the cheers fading into a distant hum, the arena transformed. Spectacle, glory, and brutality intertwined like lovers lost in a tragic embrace. This was no ordinary tournament, it was a mirror reflecting the chaos of life itself, a glimpse into the heart of humanity. I stood there, shivering with a relentless ache, caught in the swirling emotions of victory and defeat, love and loss. The joust had ended, but for us, the echoes would linger, haunting and beautiful, an endless cycle of hope battling despair. The stained glass window shattered like 1,000 tiny hearts, sending shards cascading to the stone floor. The air bristled with the crackling tension of sacred promises broken, the scent of incense mingling with the iron tang of blood. I stood frozen in that moment, my breath hitching, as the echo of a sermon resounded in my mind, "Thou shalt not kill." The words felt heavy, painted in gold yet tarnished with hypocrisy. Outside, the townsfolk shouted hymns that twisted into screams, their voices rising like the smoke of heretics burning at the stake. Evelyn, her fingers trembling like the fluttering wings of a trapped bird, knelt beside the shattered glass. Her wide eyes darted, searching for solace in a world spiraling into chaos. She was a child of the church, raised on promises of salvation, yet the very foundation of her faith cracked under the weight of the violence she witnessed. "They said God is love," she whispered, her voice quaking, "but where is that love now?" I remembered her laughter, light and airy, a melody that could lift the heaviest hearts. But today, that laughter was a ghost, haunting the hallowed halls of the church. With each moment, the clock on the wall ticked down the seconds of innocence, the hands moving inexorably towards a reckoning. In the distance, the clang of metal against metal rang out, a reminder that faith and fear often wear the same face. And there was Marcus, draped in the tattered robes of a once respected priest, his hands stained with the remnants of a violent past. He had stood before the congregation, a shepherd guiding his flock, but now his gaze fell on the ground, as if the earth itself had opened to swallow his soul. "They need to understand," he murmured, "that violence can be a path to God." I shivered at his words. How could he articulate such madness with a calmness that chilled? The scripture he preached turned into a weapon, a blade forged in fervor. He was lost, caught in a web spun from years of conflict between the dogma he had embraced and the blood on his hands. I wanted to scream, to pull him back from the abyss, but I too was shackled by the same chains of belief that had brought us here. Evelyn's gaze flicked to Marcus, wide with confusion and fear. "Is this what faith has become? A justification for murder?" she pleaded, her voice a tremor against the crashing waves of chaos. Every word felt like a fragile glass that threatened to shatter. "Sometimes," he replied, voice low and gravelly, "to protect the faith, you must be willing to shed blood. It is our duty." The conviction in his tone sent chills through me, the sheer horror of it wrapping around my heart like a noose. I wanted to shake him, to scream, but at what cost? What is left of the soul when it is stained with the blood of its own? The townsfolk were gathering now, a flurry of shadows pooling in the church doorway. Faces twisted in anger, eyes burning with righteous fury. The heretics must be purged, their cries rang out, fervor igniting their spirits. They were the embodiment of a faith twisted into a weapon, each chant a step closer to violence. Evelyn, trembling, rose to her feet, determination etched into her delicate features. "No. This is not how we honor him." Her voice rang clear, slicing through the growing storm like a beacon of light. But the light was dimming, and the shadows closed in, ready to consume her. "Stand back!" Marcus roared, the authoritative timbre of his voice a stark contrast to the boy who once played games in the fields, who had shared dreams of a kinder world. I saw the struggle within him, the flicker of a soul wrestling with its own darkness. Desire to protect clashed violently with the horror of his own beliefs. He was the embodiment of the church, an institution steeped in centuries of bloodshed, but also in hope. Where did one end and the other begin? The crowd surged, a living tide of anger and zeal, pressing against the fragile barrier of faith that separated them from the others. I could feel the heat from their bodies, the desperation of their cries. In that moment, time tangled and twisted, looping back to the very beginning of our stories, the moment when faith became twisted into something monstrous. I remember the first time I heard a sermon that spoke of divine retribution, the first time I felt the warmth of God's love transform into a cold blade, a shiver that ran down my spine. I remember the glorious promises of the afterlife, painted in vibrant colors, yet overshadowed by the shadows of those who had come before us, their cries still echoing in the silence of the saints. "Help us, God," they cried, as the flames devoured their flesh, turning them into smoke and ash. "Forgive us our sins." Their voices melded into the very air we breathed, haunting us, reminding us of the cost of believing. With each heartbeat, the tension escalated. Evelyn's resolve clashed with Marcus's fear. The walls of the church, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage, each stone a witness to the violence that surged within. Outside, the world had become a battlefield, the bright light of the sun now shrouded in shadows, the kind that draped over us like a funeral shroud. "Is this what we sacrifice?" I shouted, but my voice was drowned by the cacophony of fury. "Is this our faith now? To kill in his name?" My heart raced, blood pounding in my ears, drowning out the memories of laughter, of joy, of the love that slipped like sand through our fingers. But it was too late. The chants rose higher, a symphony of violence orchestrated by the very hands that were meant to heal. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows creeping closer, ready to envelop us in darkness. Each breath was heavy with the weight of our sins, the ghosts of those who had come before, their stories unfinished, their cries lost in the storm. And in that moment, as the world around me began to fracture, I realized, this is where faith has led us. A place where love is drowned in the blood of the innocent, where the sanctity of life is sacrificed at the altar of fear, and all that remains is the haunting echo of a question that refuses to fade: what have we become in the name of God? A flicker of hope battled against despair, weaving through the chaos. But just as I reached for it, the world erupted, and I was left standing, caught between faith and fear, love and violence, a witness to the darkness that had come home. The wind howled like a banshee through the narrow streets of the village, twisting and turning, carrying with it the scent of despair. I stood there, clutching my tattered cloak, feeling the sharp bite of the night air. A distant bell tolled, 1, 2, 3, counting down the moments until the soldiers would return. They had taken everything from us, yet here we stood, heads bowed, shoulders trembling, a pitiful assembly of the lost and broken. A flickering torch illuminated the haggard faces around me, shadows dancing, revealing haunted eyes that told stories of hunger, fear, and resignation. "Look for the silver lining," they had said. "Life is a tapestry." But what tapestry? Ours was a shroud, the kind that suffocates. In the midst of this bleakness stood Eloan, her auburn hair flowing like flames against the night. She was the spirit of defiance, a spark in our desolate existence, a daughter of the earth, yet she was treated like the dirt beneath the noble's boot. I watched her as she clenched her fists, knuckles white, a storm brewing within her that threatened to shatter the fragile peace we held. "They can't keep us in chains forever," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We deserve more than this." The villagers whispered, glancing around, eyes wide with fear. There was danger in her words. Danger in daring to dream of freedom while the moon hung high above us like a judgmental deity. I felt the weight of their stares, the tremors of their doubt. Fear was a palpable thing, thick in the air, heavy like the fog that swallowed the night. Nearby, a gaunt figure shifted, Thomas, his face gaunt, a portrait of suffering. He was a man of scars, each one a testament to the relentless grind of peasantry. "You think they'll listen?" he spat, voice like gravel, a bitter undertone threading through his words. "The Lords dine on our bones while we scrape by on crumbs, Eloan. We're dust to them, just another cog in their machine." His eyes, once bright, now dulled by despair, flickered with a hint of something, fear, perhaps, or maybe something more, rage. But I saw it, too, the fire simmering beneath his anguish, clawing to break free like a beast in a cage. It was the same fire that burned in Eloan, yet it was tempered by her hope, her dreams of a brighter morrow. I felt torn between them, caught in a tempest where hearts battled against the cruel reality of our existence. The moon hung low, a harbinger of what was to come. "We must unite," Eloan pressed, her voice rising, echoing through the darkness. "We can't let them take our spirit. We are more than the labourers in their fields, we are the roots of this land." But how could I believe? I was a mere shadow, a fleeting ghost in a world that never saw me. The weight of my own insignificance pressed down like a shroud. And then, the ground trembled. Torches flared in the distance, the rhythmic clang of armor approaching. The villagers fell silent, fear coiling around us like a snake, tightening with each ominous step. The soldiers were returning, their laughter cutting through the night like a rusty blade. They were our oppressors, the embodiments of chivalry that promised protection but delivered only exploitation. Their swords glinted, promises of violence and subjugation glistening like jewels in the dark. "Stand firm," Eloan whispered, her voice a fierce whisper. I looked at her, the fire in her eyes igniting something deep within me, a flicker of courage. I clenched my fists, feeling the pulse of my heart, a tattoo of rebellion against the mundane despair that had shackled me for too long. But Thomas shook his head. "You're a fool if you think they care for us." His voice was bitter, laced with the weight of reality. "They'll slaughter anyone who dares to defy." A chill ran through me, the realization that he was right. Yet, at that moment, something shifted. The tension in the air thickened, a brewing storm. As the soldiers marched closer, their voices raucous, a terrible sense of clarity washed over me. I didn't want to be a ghost, I didn't want to fade into the shadows like the rest of my kin. I wanted to scream, to unleash my pain and anger, to let them know we were not mere cattle to be herded and slaughtered. Eloan stood tall, her silhouette framed against the flickering torchlight. "Today marks a new beginning," she shouted, her voice defiant, cutting through the night like a knife. There was a ripple of gasps, a moment of disbelief. Had she truly lost her mind? But I saw it then, a glimmer of hope igniting in the faces around me. The fear that had gripped us began to loosen its hold, replaced by a burgeoning courage that dared to rise against oppression. What's life without a fight? I thought. The soldiers were not just monsters, they were men, and men could bleed. I took a step forward, the warmth of Eloan's fire seeping into my very soul. "We're not afraid," I shouted, my voice raw, rattling like an echo in the dark. "We will not kneel." And with that, the world seemed to shift. The soldiers, their laughter dying on their lips, faltered, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. There was a moment, the heartbeat, where the abyss of despair met the flicker of rebellion. We were no longer shadows. We were flesh and blood, hearts pounding in rhythm with the defiance swirling around us. The confrontation loomed, a heavy hand pressing down upon us, waiting to unleash chaos upon our fragile unity. This was it, the heart of the storm. I could feel the pulse of history in my veins, tremors of change, the echoes of our ancestors urging us to rise. The night was thick with tension, an invisible line drawn in the sand. And as we stood there, warriors of the forgotten, the world held its breath. Would we shatter the chains of oppression, or would the weight of class and privilege crush our spirits once more? I didn't know. And yet, perhaps, in that uncertainty lay our greatest strength. To stand and fight, regardless of the outcome, was the first act of defiance. A single heartbeat against the tide of history. I looked at Eloan, her fierce spirit igniting a flame within me, and in that moment, I knew we would not go quietly into the night. The world awaited, a tapestry of chaos and possibility, and we were about to weave ourselves into its fabric. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and choking, curling around the remnants of what had once been a village filled with laughter, the sound now replaced by the haunting echoes of destruction. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like specters among the ruins. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked and its dress stained with dust and blood, lay abandoned in the dirt, a grotesque reminder of innocence lost. I could almost hear the giggles of the children that had once played here, their laughter now silenced by the weight of swords and the cries of the dying. Eleanor stood there, her heart pounding, her breath hitching in her throat as she inhaled the stench of charred remains. Her husband, once a knight of unyielding valor, now fought battles in the shadows of his own mind, a ghost wandering the halls of their home, a home that had been a sanctuary, now reduced to ashes and grief. "I remember," she whispered to herself, trembling. "I remember when he would return with stories of chivalry and honor." But those memories felt like shards of glass now, cutting deeper with every passing moment. Across the remnants of the village, Ambrose knelt, dirt caked under his fingernails, feeling each grain of soil as if it were a piece of humanity slipping away. He had sworn an oath to protect, to serve, to stand as a bulwark against the tides of chaos. Yet here he was, a knight-turned-executioner, his sword stained not with the blood of enemies, but with the blood of innocents caught in the crossfire of merciless ambition. He remembered the faces of the villagers, the warmth of their smiles as they welcomed him like a brother. Now, those faces were replaced with hollow eyes staring into the abyss, accusing him in their silence. "I remember," he muttered, as if trying to exorcise the demons that clawed at the edges of his sanity. "I remember when I used to believe in something greater." As twilight descended, a heavy blanket of despair wrapped around the remnants of life, suffocating. The sound of hooves echoed through the smoke, the rhythmic beat like the thud of a heart slowly fading. Eleanor's gaze snapped upward, her chest tightening as she saw the silhouettes of knights emerging from the haze, their armor glinting ominously in the dying light. They were agents of destruction, harbingers of pain wrapped in the guise of honor. A shiver coursed through her, not just from fear, but from the painful recognition of what they had become, a reflection of the darkness that had seeped into their souls. "I just wanted to protect you," Ambrose shouted, the words escaping in a desperate plea, echoing against the walls of his own shattered ideals. The knights loomed closer, their faces obscured by helmets that concealed humanity. Their presence was like a storm, swirling with the promise of violence and chaos, and he stood in its path, a mere flicker of resistance against the tide of destruction. He could feel the weight of their swords, not just on their hips, but on his conscience, an unbearable burden that threatened to crush him. "You don't understand," he cried out, his voice breaking, as he thought of the families left behind, of Eleanor, of children who would never know safety again. "We were supposed to be the protectors, the heroes." Eleanor's heart raced, a wild drum in her chest, as she stepped forward, her own grief transformed into a fierce resolve. "You are not heroes," she shouted, her voice a raw knife cutting through the smoke and despair. "You are the monsters we feared at night. You are the shadows that creep into our homes." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric, sparking something primal in the hearts of those who had once sworn to uphold the virtues of knighthood. Faces turned, the knights paused, the air thick with tension, pregnant with unspoken truths. Ambrose could see flickers of doubt, of humanity, behind the cold visors of his comrades. He took a step forward, every ounce of him aching to tear away the facade of might and honor that had blinded them all. "Remember what we stand for," he implored, heart racing, as memories flooded his mind, the laughter of children, the warmth of a hearth, the hope that had once filled their hearts. "We were never meant to be the destroyers." But as the stars began to twinkle overhead, the world felt more like a dream than reality, a twisted nightmare from which they could not wake. The knights shifted uneasily, their armor clinking like chains dragging through the dust of lost dreams. Eleanor's voice was a rallying cry, a beacon in the darkness. "If you can hear me, if there's still a part of you that remembers what it means to be a protector, then stand with us. Stand for the lives that depend on us." And then, in that moment of desperation, Ambrose felt a tremor of recognition deep within. He remembered the day he had donned his armor for the first time, the weight of it pressing down like a promise made to the innocent, the powerless. "I remember," he said again, the words nearly lost in the chaos. "I remember when the sword was a symbol of justice, not fear." The air crackled with energy, a silent war brewing not just between knights and villagers, but within the hearts of men torn between duty and morality. In that fleeting moment, under the heavy cloak of night, a choice lay before them, a choice that could either drown them in darkness or guide them to the light. But the clock was ticking, the shadows growing long, and the weight of history pressed down like an unyielding tide, whispering of the atrocities that had come before. And in that weight, the realization dawned, perhaps they were not just agents of destruction, perhaps they were lost souls seeking redemption in a world that had forgotten what it meant to truly protect. The knights stood at a crossroads, and as the ghosts of the past beckoned, the air thickened with the promise of change, a shimmering thread of hope weaving through the heart of despair, if only they dared to grasp it. The moon hung heavy and full, casting an eerie glow on the cobblestone streets of the forgotten village. I stood there, heart thudding like war drums, my breath billowing into the night like smoke from a dying fire. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering with the pulse of an unseen tension, and in that moment, every whispered tale of love and valor felt like a mockery of the very reality I faced. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth, the metallic tang of fear mingling with the sweet scent of blooming night jasmine. "What are you doing here?" A voice, rough yet tender, sliced through the silence. Seraphine emerged from the shadows, her silhouette sharp and defiant, a warrior draped in the remnants of a past that clung to her like a tattered banner. Her eyes, two stormy seas, mirrored the chaos raging within. "I came to find you," I stumbled over the words, the weight of them dragging me down as if the ghosts of chivalry lingered just a breath away. She was the embodiment of every knight's quest, the muse that ignited the fires of poets and dreamers alike. Yet here she stood, flesh and bone, teetering on the brink of despair. "Finding me won't change anything," she replied, her voice cracking like a fragile glass about to shatter. The stories, they were lies. Each word struck like a dagger, twisting in the open wound of my heart. I had built my world around the notion of gallantry, of knights rescuing damsels from the clutches of darkness, but reality was a far more insidious beast. It clawed at the edges of our lives, gnawing at the truth. I remember, how I had thought love could save us, that it was a shining armor against the brutality of life. But she was right. The tale spun by the bards wove a tapestry that depicted valor but omitted the scars. But what if we can still write our own story? I asked, the desperation creeping into my voice, the chasm of hope widening beneath our feet. There was something daunting yet intoxicating about it, a blank page stretching before us, a chance to reclaim our narrative from the ashes of history. Seraphine laughed, a sound that echoed like shattered glass. "You think love is enough? It's a banquet for fools. Love doesn't shield you from pain, it lays you bare." Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and I could see the memories playing behind her eyes, the man who had promised her the world and left her with nothing but shadows, the dreams that had turned to dust in the light of day. I reached for her hand, a gesture both futile and necessary. "What do we have if not each other?" I wanted to scream, to shake her from her despair, to thrust her into the light of possibility. Instead, I felt the weight of my own failures, my own inadequacies pressing down like a leaden shroud. And then there was Eric, lurking in the background, a spectre of my own creation. The embodiment of my jealousy, the knight I had spun from tales of old, the perfect hero who was nothing more than a pixelated fantasy in a world full of grayscale. Eric, the knight who wore his valor like a badge of honor, who loved Seraphine with a passion that burned brighter than 1,000 suns, yet he was nowhere to be found in this moment of reckoning. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "Why isn't he here fighting for you?" "Because he's not real," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Not anymore." Her admission sliced through me, and suddenly the very worlds we had created in our minds felt like a prison. The love stories, the battles fought in the name of honor, the battles lost in the name of love, all reduced to echoes in an empty hall. I remember the chilling realization, like the icy grip of night creeping into my bones. The legacy of chivalric literature was not a tale of triumph, it was a testament to our failures. Each knight with their noble quests, each lady waiting in vain, each battle fought in the name of love, it was a cruel farce. As the wind whispered through the trees, I felt the essence of every knight's folly seep into the very fabric of our reality. What if we abandon the stories? I found myself suggesting, words spilling from my lips like confession. What if we forge our own path, free from the weight of expectation? Seraphine's gaze turned fierce, illuminating the depths of her struggle. And what if we fail? What if we become the very shadows we fear? In that moment, I could see it, the flicker of hope battling against the darkness that threatened to consume us. I could feel the surge of something ancient and powerful, the very essence of humanity itself. We were flawed, we were broken, but we were alive. And maybe that was enough. The night deepened, wrapping around us like a cocoon, and I understood, the legacy of chivalric literature wasn't merely about love and valor. It was a reflection of our reality, a chaotic dance between dreams and nightmares, a reminder that every heart bears scars and every soul yearns for connection. And there we stood, three figures in the dim light of an uncertain future, two lovers entangled in despair, one ghost haunting their every move. The path before us was laden with challenges, but it was ours to navigate, ours to redefine. As the echoes of our choices lingered in the air, I felt a shift, a tremor of possibility, and the world around us seemed to hold its breath, waiting. There was no resolution, no neat bow to tie everything together. Just the pulse of heartbeats, the rhythm of uncertainty, and the promise that our story, whatever it would become, was ours to write. And as the moon hung heavy, casting its eerie glow upon the cobblestones, I knew the night was far from over. Shadows whispered we could still find light amidst the darkness, if only we dared to reach for it. The sun hung low, a molten orb bleeding crimson into the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows that danced upon the cobbled streets of Eldamere. I stood there, heart hammering like a blacksmith's mallet against a forge, as the marketplace crackled with a suffocating tension, a storm brewing beneath the surface. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear, mingling with the rancid odor of decay wafting from the nearby alleyways. A body lay sprawled, lifeless, its stillness a mockery of the clamor surrounding it, eyes wide open, a scream frozen on its lips, forever echoing the horror of betrayal. I remember the first time I felt the noose of knighthood tightening around my throat. It was a pledge made in blood and honor, yet now it tightened with the rusted grip of corruption. Sir Alaric, noble knight turned shadowed figure, stood beside me, a facade of stoicism hiding a heart steeped in treachery. The tales whispered of his gallant deeds, of victories won with valor, but beneath that polished armor lay a man laden with sins, bribery, lust for power, and an insatiable hunger for control. Every coin exchanged, every promise broken, made him less of a knight and more of a spectre of greed. Brigands, they call them, he muttered, his voice gravelly, a worn stone in a river of darkness.
But what is a knight if not a brigand with a coat of arms?
The question hung in the air, heavy with implication, resonating deep within me, a mirror reflecting my own doubts, my own desires. I had always believed in the chivalric code, in the nobility of our cause, yet here we were, knee-deep in muck, our armor tarnished by our own hands. I remember the first time Alaric led me to the backroom of the Boar's Head Tavern, a den of vice where shadows whispered secrets and gold changed hands like confessions. The flickering torchlight illuminated the faces of men who wore their sins like fine cloaks, laughter spilling out like the ichor of a festering wound. Power, Alaric said, his voice barely above a whisper, is a game.
The rules?
Whatever keeps you at the top. I could feel the weight of his words, the gravity pulling me toward a destiny I had not chosen but was unwillingly accepting, like a moth drawn to flame. And then there was Eloan, a healer caught in the crossfire of our corruption. Her hands, delicate as the petals of a dying rose, could mend flesh but could not heal the rift growing between us. Every time I sought her counsel, her eyes reflected a broken trust, a betrayal that ran deeper than any wound. You wear your knighthood like a mask, but beneath it, I see the rot, she said one night, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her tear-streaked face. You think you fight for honor, but you are a pawn in their game. I remember the taste of that betrayal, bitter like gall. Her words lodged in my throat, an incessant reminder of my failures.
Could I still be the man she believed I was?
Or had I become a mere echo of the knight I aspired to be? The walls of Eldamere closed in around me, the shadows whispering secrets I was too afraid to confront. The city had become a living beast, thrumming with life and death, a paradox of beauty and decay. I was trapped in its belly, a scream swallowed by the night. A meeting was called, the Council of Elders, a gathering intended to rid the kingdom of the corruption festering beneath its surface. But I knew better. I could see the glint of greed in their eyes, the way they shifted in their seats, anticipating the spoils of power like starving wolves. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken agendas and concealed daggers. Alaric sat at the head of the table, a wolf in sheep's clothing, orchestrating the chaos like a maestro guiding an unholy symphony. Let the guilty be punished, he declared, voice smooth as honey, concealing the venom beneath. I watched, heart racing, as names were drawn from the hat of bureaucracy, fools who had crossed him, men who stood in the way of his ambition. I could feel the tendrils of panic creeping through me. Was I next? Would I be sacrificed on the altar of Alaric's ambition, a mere pawn in his deadly game? Yet, in that moment of despair, a flicker of hope emerged. Eloan's haunting gaze haunted my thoughts, her whispered encouragement echoing in my mind. Fight, or you will lose everything. It ignited a fire within me, a desperate need to reclaim my honor, to protect the fragile threads of trust that remained. I would not allow my soul to be consumed by this darkness. As the meeting continued, I felt my resolve harden. I would confront Alaric, drag his masked deceit into the light, and expose the rot that had claimed our knighthood. The shadows in the room shifted, alive and pulsating with the weight of our shared sins, and I found myself stepping toward the precipice of a revelation that could shatter everything we had built. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice a thunderclap in the silence, slicing through the lies like a sword through flesh. "You speak of justice while your hands are stained with blood. Do you think we cannot see the truth?" Gasps filled the room, eyes wide like frightened deer caught in the headlights of an approaching storm. Alaric turned, fury igniting in his gaze, flames licking at the edges of his carefully crafted facade. In that moment, I felt a thrill of freedom mingled with the weight of impending doom. The shadows of betrayal loomed large, threatening to swallow me whole, yet I stood my ground, heart pounding, each heartbeat echoing like a war drum. The air crackled with tension, and I could feel the world shifting around me, destiny unfurling like a scroll, the ink still wet with the blood of choices yet to be made. As the confrontation escalated, I could see Eloan's face in my mind, her unwavering spirit a beacon through the storm. I was no longer just a knight, I was a man fighting for redemption, for justice, and for the soul of Eldamir. And so, the dance began, between loyalty and betrayal, honor and corruption, the heartbeat of chaos reverberating through the very fabric of our world, a tempest ready to break. Each moment pulled me deeper into the abyss, a haunting reminder that in the game of power, no one escapes unscathed. The courtyard was alive with a cacophony of steel clashing against steel, the air saturated with the metallic scent of blood and sweat. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as Sir Alaric, the embodiment of honor, faced off against a brigand. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that twisted like secrets on the cobblestones. I could feel the tension, thick, electric, crackling like lightning in the air. Time stretched, an elastic band pulled taut. Would it snap? I remember the way Alaric's eyes burned with fury, a flicker of something deeper, something buried beneath layers of polished armor and courtly grace. He was a knight in every sense, a champion of ideals, yet there was a desperation there, raw and urgent, flickering just beneath the surface. His sword sang through the air, slicing it with a practiced grace, yet every strike felt like a cry for justice, a plea for a world that didn't exist. Across the courtyard, Lady Isolde observed, her heart caught in a tempest of emotions. She was a tapestry of contrasts, woven from threads of longing and despair. She wore the weight of expectation like a shroud, the delicate lace of her gown clinging to her as if it too were suffocating. "Defend my honor," they said. "Protect my virtue." Yet here she was, a spectator in a game that demanded her silence. I could see it in her eyes, the anger simmering beneath the surface, the burning fire of a warrior trapped inside a gilded cage. "Alaric," she cried, her voice slicing through the chaos like a dagger. "What do you fight for?" "Not my honor. Yours. To be the gallant knight, to be the hero. Yet who fights for me?" The words hung in the air, heavy, like the weight of the world pressing down on her slender shoulders. I could see Alaric hesitate, just for a moment, a chink in his armor. He glanced back at her, and in that fleeting instant, vulnerability pierced through his bravado. Was it guilt? Regret? The knowledge that while he battled for glory, the very ideals that shaped him were shackling her? I remember the way the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the courtyard in twilight, a realm where shadows danced and whispered secrets of the past. It was as if the very ground beneath us sighed with the weight of history. The knights of old, they spoke of honor and valor, yet never once did they bother to question the price of such ideals. Who would pay it? The brigand lunged, and Alaric's reflexes kicked in, a primal instinct that had been honed to perfection. But even as he struck, a part of him faltered, the echo of Isolde's voice reverberating in his mind. Am I a man, a knight of chivalry, or am I a fool? The clash of swords rang out, and with each strike, the distance between them grew, not just in space, but in understanding, in the gnawing realization that chivalry wasn't just a code, it was a cage. Alaric was bound by expectations, shackled to notions of masculinity that dictated his every move. Yet Isolde, fierce and fiery, bore her own burdens. She knew the stories, the legends that sang of gallant knights embarking on epic quests, yet she was left with only the haunting echoes of those tales. What if I had a sword, she wondered, her heart racing, the thrill of possibility coursing through her veins.
What would I fight for? Who would I become?
But she was bound, wrapped in the silk of duty, her dreams crumbling like parchment in a fire. Time slipped away, ticking like a clock counting down to an inevitable fate, and with each heartbeat, I felt the tension mount. The brigand roared, fury in his throat, clashing against the chivalric ideal that Alaric personified. They were two sides of a coin, spinning through the air, destined to land on different outcomes. With desperation clawing at my throat, I yearned for something to break, a revelation, a moment of clarity.
Would Isolde jump into the fray? Would she seize her own destiny, or would she remain a spectator, condemned to silence and shadows?
The courtyard felt like a stage, and the audience was held captive, breathless. Every moment stretched taut, an elastic band on the verge of snapping. I could feel the urge to scream, to shake Alaric from his reverie, to tell Isolde that she could be more than what society decreed. But words were lost in the chaos, swallowed by the tide of history and expectation. Then, in a heartbeat that felt like eternity, a blade found its mark. Alaric's sword slipped, a moment's error, and the brigand lunged forward. I felt the collective gasp of the crowd, the horror dawning like a dark cloud overhead. Isolde's scream shattered the air, a sound so primal it made the hair on my arms stand on end. Alaric! It echoed through the courtyard, a siren wailing into the night. But it wasn't just his name she cried, it was a battle cry against the constraints that bound them both, a desperate call for recognition, for agency in a world that demanded their silence. And in that moment, as Alaric stumbled, blood staining the cobblestones, everything shifted. The rigid lines of chivalry blurred, rendering the knight and the lady equally vulnerable, equally human, caught in the crossfire of a society that demanded perfection while allowing none. I remember the chaos unfolding, the fight, the blood, the desperation, the realization that the ideals they both clung to were as fragile as glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. As the sun sunk beneath the horizon, darkness settled in, but the fight continued, a tempest brewing, the kind that would rip apart the fabric of their lives and challenge everything they thought they knew. And as I stood there, watching the unfolding tempest, I realized this was not just a battle for honor or virtue, it was a fight for their very souls, a struggle against a double standard that had bound them both. Would they rise as warriors together, or would they remain shackled by the role society had carved for them? The answer lingered in the air, a question unanswered, forever echoing in the twilight. The clang of steel echoed through the dimly lit courtyard, a brutal symphony of chaos. Blood-smeared banners fluttered in a chilling breeze, while the air was thick with the metallic scent of death. I stood there, heart pounding, as a knight, once a proud symbol of honor, crumpled to the ground, his shining armor a grotesque mockery of valor. The laughter of the onlookers felt like daggers, piercing through the tension, a twisted celebration of a world teetering on the edge of decay. I remember the moment clearly, how the sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the cobblestones. They all thought it was just another tournament, another display of chivalry, a chance to bask in the glory of knights jousting for honor as if it still meant something. But beneath the surface of gleaming armor and deafening cheers lay the rotting heart of a society in decline, and amid the carnage, two figures emerged, each wrestling with their own demons. There was Serafina, her eyes ablaze with determination, a warrior-bred woman who fought not just for herself but for the ideals of a dying age. She wielded her sword not merely as a weapon but as a shield against the inevitable tide of change. The clang of metal against metal was music to her ears, a reminder of a lineage steeped in duty and valor. Yet, the pain in her chest festered like a wound, every clash drained her hope, every fallen comrade gnawed at her spirit. "Is this what we've become?" she shouted, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and despair. "Is this the legacy we leave behind? I remember when honor meant something. When loyalty wasn't just a whisper in the wind." But the wind carried her words away, lost among the cheers of a crowd oblivious to the crumbling world around them. And there was Talon, a knight once revered, now a hollow shell of the man he used to be. He watched Serafina, torn between admiration and anguish as he faltered under the weight of his own failures. Once, he had believed in the code, the very fabric of nobility that defined their existence, but now, as he surveyed the battlefield, he felt like a ghost haunting his own memories. "I remember the first time I held a sword," he murmured to himself, as if the memory could anchor him amidst the chaos. I was invincible, full of dreams, a romantic fool. His laughter was bitter, drowning in the realization that his ideals had become nothing more than shattered dreams littering the ground beneath their feet. The battlefield transformed into a theater of absurdity, and each strike against metal felt like the heartbeat of a dying era. Seraphina's spirit flared with defiance, but doubt gnawed at her insides as she faced Talon. They had fought together, shared fleeting glances that spoke volumes, yet now an invisible wall loomed between them. Remember the stories they told us, she pressed, her voice breaking. The tales of knights who fought for love, for honor, for a world where chivalry mattered? Where have those stories gone? Talon swallowed hard, grappling with the weight of her words. They've been drowned out, Seraphina. The world has changed, and we are left clinging to echoes of what we once were. The banners may still flutter, but the values they represent have decayed into farce. A grim realization settled in the air, thick and suffocating. As they stood amidst the clamor of battle, they became vessels of longing, longing for a time when knights were heroes and love was more than a fleeting glance across a blooded field. The ghosts of their ancestors whispered in the shadows, but the moment was alive with visceral reality, a churning storm of conflicting desires. Seraphina advanced, her sword raised with fierce determination, but a flicker of doubt lingered in her heart. We cannot let it die. We have to fight for something greater than ourselves. Talon stepped back, the weight of the world heavy on his shoulders. What are we fighting for, Seraphina? For a memory? For an illusion? The chivalry you crave is buried beneath the corpses of the past. We need to adapt, to survive. Feelings mean nothing on this field. With every word, the air thickened with tension, the crackle of intensity igniting the space between them. A moment stretched, a heartbeat, then another, until it snapped like a taut string. The clash of swords resonated in the background, but for them, the battle was internal, an emotional tempest raging beneath the surface. Don't you see, she cried, desperation bleeding through. We are the last of a dying breed. We owe it to those who came before us to uphold their legacy. But Talon felt the world shifting underfoot, the ground swelling with new voices, new warriors who fought not for honor but for survival. Honor is a luxury we can no longer afford. You speak of ideals, Seraphina, but they are ghosts now. We must embrace this new world, or we will be lost in the ruins. The moment hung heavy with lost dreams, a painful dichotomy of hope and despair. The battlefield continued to ride with chaos, but they stood outside of it, captured in an eternal standoff, two souls trapped in a cycle of longing, grappling with the very essence of their beliefs as the last vestiges of chivalry crumbled into dust. The sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows lengthening, wrapping around them like a shroud, and all around, the laughter morphed into a haunting cacophony, a reminder of a world that had moved on. And as the clashing swords rang out with a relentless rhythm, they understood the truth that loomed like a spectre. The battlefield was not just a place of war, it was a crucible of change, where every clash, every fallen knight whispered of a world unrecognizable, a society wrestling with its own heart, a chivalry forever altered yet never forgotten. In that moment, they were not just warriors, they were witnesses to the end of an era, standing on the precipice of something immense and terrifying. Every heartbeat echoed the question that hung in the air: what would rise from the ashes of chivalry? The answer lay beyond the horizon, shrouded in shadows and whispers, and as they turned their gaze to the battlefield, the truth tightened its grip around their souls, pulling them deeper into the unknown. The streetlights flickered like dying stars, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted, clawing at the crumbling brick walls of the old city. A cold wind shivered through the alley, whispering secrets of a time long past, a time steeped in blood and honor. In the distance, a bell tolled midnight, a sound that echoed through the empty space, marking not just the hour but the heartbeat of a world where chivalry was born amidst the clamor of swords and the stench of sweat. I remember the night I met Clara. Her laughter danced on the wind, a haunting melody that ricocheted off the cobblestones. She was dressed in a flowing gown of deep crimson, a striking contradiction to the darkness that enveloped us. Clara, with her fierce spirit and unyielding gaze, was a vision of modernity wrapped in the ancient vestiges of a romantic past. What does it mean to be noble? She mused, her eyes narrowing in thought. Is it the sword or the heart that defines a knight? Across the street, Marcus leaned against a graffiti-laden wall, arms crossed, a scowl etched on his face. The epitome of modern masculinity, he contrasted sharply with the ideals of chivalry. Nobility? That's just a fairy tale, Clara. Look around. We're not in some Arthurian legend. This is the real world. The tension between them crackled like static electricity, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Clara's spirit flared, her passion igniting the air. And isn't that exactly why we need it? The world is devoid of honor. We're drowning in selfishness and greed. The city around them seemed to hold its breath. The shadows danced, swirling with the weight of their argument, and I felt the pull of history wrapping around me, centuries of knights and battles, of glory and shame. I remembered the tales my grandfather told me of knights who fought not just for land but for love, who displayed courage and virtue, cloaked in the armor of chivalry. But those stories masked the reality, the brutal truths of a time when honor was often a mask for violence, when the code of the knight blurred with the blood of innocence. Chivalry is a myth, Marcus shot back, his voice sharp as a blade. They bathed once a year. So yeah, romance was earthy. The corner of his mouth lifted in a sardonic smile, but there was pain in his eyes, an echo of disappointment, perhaps. Clara's retort was quick, a spark fueled by conviction. But they fought for something greater than themselves. The bond of loyalty, the promise to protect the weak. Each word hung heavy, weighed down by the ghosts of men who had wielded swords and shields, driven by codes that often led them to destruction. The tension twisted in my chest, a knot of conflicting emotions as I stood witness to their clash. I felt the urge to step in, to break the spell of the moment, to douse the flames licking at their hearts. But I remained a silent observer, breathing in the air thick with history and modernity intertwined. "Tell me, Marcus," Clara demanded, stepping closer, her voice an intoxicating mix of defiance and desperation. "What would you do if you saw someone being bullied? Would you turn your back or stand up?" The question hung in the air, charged with an urgency that could ignite a fire. I watched Marcus's expression shift, the bravado faltering as he grappled with the weight of her challenge. His shoulders fell, the armor of cynicism cracking. I wouldn't stand by. But it's not that simple. In this world, being a hero might cost you everything. His words came slow, like molasses, thick with the realization of a truth he'd tried to bury. He was a knight without a kingdom, a warrior without a cause, haunted by the specters of his choices. And Clara, she was a storm, relentless and fierce. So we let the darkness win? We let fear snuff out the light. Her voice climbed, rising above the din of the night. The essence of lit candles flickered in her heart, illuminating the corners of despair. We have to be better than this. We must redefine what it means to be noble. I felt the world around us quiver, the echoes of history reverberating through the moment. The moon hung overhead, a silent witness to their struggle, the universe wide and indifferent as they stood on the precipice of their beliefs, grappling for clarity amid chaos. I remembered the stories I had read, the history etched in the annals of time, of knights who had fallen, of battles fought not just with swords but with principles, ideals that flickered like those candles, fragile yet beautiful. Clara took a step closer to Marcus, her voice barely more than a whisper now. If we don't challenge ourselves, if we don't try to embody the very essence of chivalry, if we don't discover if it's a myth or a truth, then what are we fighting for? As her words settled, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, a distant memory of youth and hope. The clock struck the hour again, resounding in the silence between them, a heartbeat, a reminder of time's relentless passage. The tension was palpable, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us, and I couldn't help but feel the pull of their shared journey, the convergence of past and present, myth and reality. I watched as Marcus's walls crumbled, the flicker of understanding igniting within him. Maybe we can create our own code," he murmured, the vulnerability raw and real. "A code that reflects who we are now. Not just knights in shining armor, but humans just trying to be decent." The city breathed with them, its ancient stones cradling their hopes and fears. I felt the world shift beneath my feet, history and modernity colliding in a beautiful chaos, as if the universe was giving a nod to their fragile, yet fierce hearts. And in that moment, under the flickering streetlights, amidst shadows and echoes, everything felt possible. Their conversation transformed into a dance of ideas, a swirling tempest of hopes and dreams, of ideals that stretched beyond the grasp of time. A new dawn was breaking, illuminated by the flicker of candlelight within them, a beacon amidst the shadows. And as I stood by, tethered to their moment, I couldn't help but wonder, what stories would we tell in the chambers of the future? What myths would we build, and what truths would rise from the ashes of the past? The night continued to pulse around us, a living canvas painted with the hues of struggle and hope, questions lingering like stars in the deep, dark cosmos, a reminder that the quest for honor, love, and nobility is never truly over. The night was thick with silence, as though the world itself held its breath, waiting. A distant cry shattered the stillness, raw and primal, echoing from the forest. Francis clenched the hilt of his sword, knuckles white as moonlight glinted off its blade. He stood on the edge of a clearing, heart pounding in his chest like the war drums of old. Shadows shifted, swirling, as if alive, and in those shadows lay the remnants of honor, the ghostly flickers of chivalry lost in the cacophony of conquest. "Do you hear it?" Isabella whispered, her voice trembling, threading through the darkness like a fragile thread. She was a vision of defiance, fiery hair cascading around her shoulders, eyes burning with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's them, the ones who came before us. The ones we forgot." And there it was, the weight of their history pressing down so hard he could scarcely breathe. Francis felt it in the marrow of his bones, a legacy wrapped in iron and blood. He couldn't shake the feeling that in this forest, their ancestors lingered, specters of knights and kings, their chivalry twisted into grotesque forms. Cruelty woven into virtue, honor draped in the shadows of colonial expansion. He could almost hear their whispers carried by the wind, urging him, pushing him toward the brink of a precipice. The crack of a twig snapped him back. Both their heads snapped toward the sound. The forest, dense and hidden, pulsed with tension. A ghostly silhouette emerged, an enemy encroaching upon their fragile sanctuary. Heart racing, Francis stepped forward, sword drawn, ready to defend. But as the figure drew nearer, the air thickened with an uncanny familiarity. "Stop," he shouted, voice hoarse, echoing off the trees. The figure halted, revealing a face lined with scars of battles fought, a man of the land they now occupied. In his gaze, Francis saw the weight of generations, eyes deep pools of sorrow and rage. "You wear your pride like armor, but this land bleeds," the man said, voice gravelly, laced with an ancient sorrow that pierced through Francis's bravado. "Who are you to question honor?" Francis spat back, conviction flaring in his chest, but doubt crept in like a thief in the night. "Honor? Is that what you call it?" Stabbing into the heart of those who dared to exist. The man stepped closer, the tension coiling around them like a serpent, tightening and tightening. "Your swords sing of chivalry, but they are stained with the blood of innocence." Isabella shifted, her gaze darting between the two men, her heart caught in a vice. She wanted to scream, to run, but instead, she stood firm, a tiny flame flickering against the suffocating darkness. "We are here to build, to cultivate," she cried, voice trembling with fervor. "To bring civilization, civilization." The man's laughter was sharp, bitter, cutting through the air like a knife. "You call this civilization? This is madness. Your knights ride for glory, while the towns burn." His eyes, dark and fierce, bore into Francis, a mirror reflecting his own turmoil. "Tell me, what have you built?" "A castle of lies atop graves." With every word, the shadows of history danced around them, swirling in an agonizing waltz. Francis could feel the weight of his lineage pressing down, the echoes of a chivalric code that had been twisted into a weapon. He remembered the tales his father told, how valor was marred by greed, how gallantry turned to pillage. The stories of brave knights faded into a tapestry of shame. "Listen to him," Isabella urged, stepping between them, her voice a thin thread woven with desperation. "We must find a way to coexist. Honor can be reborn, can it not? Honor." The man spat the word, a curse, a lament. "You think honor can breathe in the ashes of our past? It suffocates beneath the weight of guilt. His gaze bore into Francis, a challenge and a plea. What will you choose? To uphold a legacy built on suffering, or to forge a new path? Time hung heavy in the air, the cosmos whispering their secrets, while Francis stood at the intersection of history and future. Memories flooded him, the laughter of children playing in the fields they had claimed, the stories of bravery that rang hollow in the face of the truth. He felt the ghosts of his ancestors watching, waiting for him to decide, would he wield his sword for glory or for redemption? I remember, he whispered, the words spilling out like an uncontained river. I remember the tales, the chivalry, but I cannot ignore what we've done. I cannot ignore the blood on my hands. The forest seemed to sigh, the trees leaning in, listening, holding their breath. The man stepped forward, the shadows no longer an enemy, but a reminder of the very humanity they had lost. Then choose wisely, he said, voice low and steady. The past is a ghost, but the future is clay. Shape it with intention. Isabella reached for Francis's arm, her touch grounding him amidst the whirlwind of emotions. We can honor our past by acknowledging it, she murmured, by not repeating the same mistakes. We can rebuild. But doubt clawed at him, whispering cruelly in his ear. Chivalry had become a cruel facade, a mask worn by those who sought power without wisdom. What could they, truly build upon the ruins? The man's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, the tension cracked. You are not the first to ask these questions, and you will not be the last. But you have the power to break the cycle. Will you embrace the shadows, or will you turn away? As the battle raged within him, Francis felt time slip through his fingers like grains of sand, past, present, and future tangled in a chaotic rush. His breath quickened, heart echoing in his chest as he realized, chivalry was not merely a relic of the past, it lived on in every choice, every breath taken in the face of fear and uncertainty. And in that moment, amidst the whispers of the lost and the cries of the present, he knew the confrontation was not just with the man standing before him, but within himself. What would he choose? What would he fight for? The forest enveloped them, shadows creeping, tension thickening, a breath caught in the throats of 1,000 ghosts. The night stretched on, and the world waited, breathless, for the answer to emerge from the silence. The moon hung low in the sky, a silver coin lost in the velvet darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters along the stone walls of the castle. The night air was thick with tension, and the distant clang of swords reverberated through the courtyard, a chilling symphony of metal meeting metal, a reminder that, for knights like Sir Aldrich, honor was a relentless beast, gnawing at his soul. I remember Aldrich's face, pale and haunted, illuminated by the flickering torchlight. His breath came in ragged gasps, the weight of his armor pressing down like the very sins of his past, trapping him between duty and despair. He stood amidst the chaos, a man made of flesh, yet burdened with ideals that felt more like chains. To serve, he whispered, his voice trembling, to protect, to love, but at what cost? Each word trembled, dripping with the anguish of a man caught in the gears of a grand machine that ground the spirit to dust. And then there was Elara, fierce and beautiful, her heart a cauldron bubbling with longing and fear. She watched from the shadows, her hands clenched tight, the soft fabric of her dress a stark contrast to the violence unfolding before her. Her love for Aldrich was a wildfire, consuming everything in its path, but it was also a prison. You don't have to be a knight, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, the ache of desperation threading through her words like poison. You can be free. But freedom was an alien concept, a whisper wrapped in chains, a promise her heart could not bear to acknowledge. The clang of swords grew louder, and the air thickened with the scent of sweat and fear. Aldrich faced a rival, a monstrous figure shrouded in shadows, their blades colliding with the force of thunder. Each strike echoed through the night, a reminder of the chivalric ideals that had pushed him to this brink. Honor. Valor. Loyalty. They swirled around him like a tempest, each one a dagger aimed at his heart. I must prove myself, he thought, a mantra that morphed into madness, an endless loop of unyielding expectation that threatened to consume him whole. I remember the way the shadows twisted in the corners of my memory, whispering dark truths that made my skin crawl. What does it mean to be brave? Aldrich would often ask, grappling with the very essence of manhood, the relentless pressure of a world that demanded perfection from its warriors. The shapes of his past haunted him, memories of battles won and lost, of comrades fallen, each ghost a reminder that chivalry was a double-edged sword, cutting deeper with every swing. Ilara's heart raced as she watched Aldrich, her fear transforming into a haunting melody that echoed in her veins. She could see his struggle, the way his eyes flickered with doubt even amid the chaos. "Come back to me," she whispered into the night, her words carried away by the wind, as if the cosmos itself mocked her desperate plea. But in a world where knighthood was worshipped and vulnerability was a sin, how could she reach him? The walls of honor loomed large, casting her aside like a discarded petal in a storm. The clashing swords rang out again, and with each strike, Aldrich felt the walls closing in. The weight of expectation bore down on his shoulders, a boulder rolling toward the precipice of his sanity. "What if I fail?" he thought, the question a specter that loomed larger than the enemy before him. His breathing quickened, panic coiling tight within him, choking out the air. The chivalric ideals he had held up as banners were turning to shrouds, wrapping around him, squeezing the life from his spirit. But then came a moment of stillness, a breath caught in the throat of the night. Both combatants paused, their swords locked, eyes searching one another for a glimpse of weakness. Aldrich's heart thundered in his chest, a war drum echoing the turmoil within him. In that fleeting moment, he felt the weight of all chivalric stories, the knights who fought not just for glory, but for the love they left behind, the families who awaited their return, the fragile dreams that hung in the balance. In that heartbeat, he saw Ilara's face flash in his mind, a beacon amid the storm. "You are more than your armor," she had once said, her voice a soft caress against the harshness of the world. And yet, here he was, tangled in the threads of fate, struggling against the very ideals that had forged him. The ghost of his father loomed over him, a man of valor who had fallen to the weight of his own chivalric legends, and the thought sent shivers down his spine. What if I'm destined for the same fate? The rival pushed harder, and Aldrich found himself teetering on the edge of despair. The clang of metal became a symphony of chaos, a cacophony drowning him in doubt. "You must be strong," the voices echoed, "you must not falter." But beneath that facade of strength lay a fragile heart, a man quaking in the shadows of his own expectations, the ideals he once venerated now feeling like a noose tightening around his throat. And then, beneath the weight of it all, Ilara stepped forth, breaking through the shadows that had engulfed him. "Aldrich," she called, her voice a lifeline, cutting through the storm. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the desperate pulse of their connection. In her eyes, he saw not judgment, but love, the raw, unyielding force that could cut through the darkness that threatened to swallow him. The moment hung in the air, electric and alive, as Aldrich's grip on his sword faltered. Can I be both? He wondered, caught between the man he was and the knight he was expected to be. In that fragile heartbeat, the weight of chivalric ideals shifted, bending, breaking, reshaping itself into something more humane, more real. A flicker of hope, a promise that perhaps he could redefine what it meant to be a knight without losing himself in the shadows. Yet, as the rival advanced, the weight of the world pressed down again, relentless and unforgiving. Aldrich's heart raced, the lines of duty and desire intertwining with every breath. The battle was not just against the foe before him but against the very ideals that had forged the man he was. He gripped his sword tighter, the metal a cold comfort in his palm, the very essence of his struggle encapsulated in that singular moment where swords clashed and souls collided. And as Ilara watched, fear and hope battling for dominance in her chest, she knew this was a moment that could shatter or reshape everything they believed. The air crackled with unspoken promises, the moon watching silently, a witness to the chaos of the human heart, the glorious and the grotesque, the knight and the man, forever fighting for a place in a world that offered no easy answers, only the haunting echo of their own desires, flickering like candlelight in the night. Aldrich steeled himself, breathing in the darkness, the shadows, the weight of chivalric ideals crumbling like ash around him. He stepped forward, ready to confront not just the enemy before him, but the relentless ghosts of his own making. In this moment, he understood, he would fight not just for honor, but for the fragile humanity that pulsed beneath the armor, a truth too raw to ignore, too vital to let slip away into the void. And as the moon cast its glow upon the battlefield, the clash of swords rang out once more, but this time, it was not just a battle, it was a reckoning. And as hearts raced and blood surged, I knew this was just the beginning. The psychological toll of chivalric ideals would echo long after the swords were sheathed, rippling through the shadows of every knight who dared to dream beyond the battlefield. The clock tower tolled midnight, its deep, resonating chime echoing through the empty streets, sending shivers coursing down my spine. Shadows danced under the flickering gaslight, each flicker a heartbeat, each heartbeat a whisper of the violence that simmered beneath the facade of civility. It was a quiet night, but the air was electric with anticipation. I stood there, breath hitching in my throat, caught between the haunting past and an uncertain future, feeling the weight of every choice I had ever made. I remember the look in Sarah's eyes, wild, desperate, as if she were trapped in a storm, raging against the confines of reality. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the hilt of the dagger tucked into her belt, a weapon that glinted with promise and peril. "This is the only way," she had said, her voice a low growl raw with emotion. But her heart was a fragile thing, a bird caught in a cage of fear and fury. I wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the precipice, but I was no better than she, tainted by the same darkness. In this city, honor was a ghost, drifting through the alleyways with threats hidden in its shadowy folds. The streets thrummed with the pulse of violence, a rhythm I had both danced to and fled from. I remember my first fight, how adrenaline coursed through me, a sweet poison, intoxicating and lethal. I had felt invincible, yet powerless, a puppet in a play directed by unseen hands. It was exhilarating, yes, but it was also a fleeting escape from the emptiness that clawed at my insides, a reminder that the line between honor and violence was a razor's edge, one I teetered on with every breath. And then there was Marcus, a man who wore his pain like armor, jagged edges of regret and loss cutting into his soul. He stood at the threshold of our confrontation, a living embodiment of despair wrapped in the shoulders of a warrior. "You think this is noble," he spat, his voice a thunderstorm, echoing off the cobblestones. "You think blood can wash away the stains of betrayal?" I could see it in his eyes, his own demons clawing at him, refusing to let him go. He had lost everything to the violence we all revered. The air thickened as we faced each other, two souls bound by a history we couldn't escape. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in Marcus' gaze, a fragile crack in his steadfast resolve. It reminded me of the time we had laughed, our voices mingling with the joyous cries of children playing, a fleeting bubble of innocence before the storm. But that laughter was long gone, crushed under the weight of choices we made and the scars we carried. I remember my own ghosts, too. They whispered at the edges of my consciousness, taunting me with memories I wished to forget. Faces of those I had wronged and those who had wronged me, all mingling together in a cacophony of regret and anger. What is honor? I had asked myself countless times, searching for answers in the faces of the fallen. I could feel it now, the cold grip of regret tightening around my throat, suffocating me with every passing second. The air crackled, raw and electric, as Sarah stepped forward, the dagger gleaming like a promise of salvation. "Honor is what we make of it," she shouted, her voice a clarion call. But I could see the cracks in her veneer, the trembling hands that betrayed her resolve. She was caught in the whirlwind of her own making, trapped between ideals and the violent reality that surrounded us. In that moment, time hung suspended, a frail thread teetering on the edge of chaos. I could feel the pulse of the city beneath my feet, a living entity mocking our struggles, our pain. We were nothing but specks of dust in the grand cosmos, yet here we were, fighting for meaning in a world that thrived on destruction. "What do we want?" I whispered, a question that echoed in the silence. "I want justice." Marcus roared, his fists clenched, a tempest of rage and sorrow. But justice was another face of vengeance, a twin that never let go. The ghosts of our past loomed, their shadows stretching long across the cobblestones, intertwining with the essence of who we had become. The clock chimed again, a sinister reminder of the time slipping away. I could feel the world closing in, the darkness thickening around us, a shroud that smothered the flickering light of hope. We were trapped, three souls dancing on the precipice of violence and honor, teetering on the edge of a knife. And then, just like that, it happened. Sarah lunged forward, the dagger a silver streak in the moonlight, and I screamed, a raw sound that tore through the stillness of the night. Time splintered, the universe holding its breath as we spiraled toward our fate, caught in the maelstrom of our choices. I remember the moment vividly, the collision of past and present, the weight of every decision crashing down like an avalanche. It was a reckoning, a visceral reminder that the dark side of honor was not merely a lesson learned but a path we had chosen, and each step echoed through the tapestry of our lives, threads woven in blood and tears. The confrontation was no longer just a fight, it was the crucible where we forged our identities, the raw heat of our emotions melding with the chaos of the world around us. And as Sarah's scream pierced the night, I knew then that this moment would linger, a ghost haunting the corridors of my mind, a lesson etched in the marrow of my bones, echoing through time and space, forever binding us in a cycle of violence and honor. I could feel every breath, every heartbeat, pulling me deeper into the darkness, into the lesson that would never end.